Radio in the 1940s and 1950s was broadcast. Television did not have brand penetration into the American household. The average American did not have a television until the late 1950s. And so in the 40s, and certainly in the most of the 50s, radio was king. And in those days, of course, the president would come on, and Roosevelt was famous for coming on and doing fireside chats with the people to encourage them through the Great Depression. And then with World War II, he announced the bombing of Pearl Harbor on radio. And so radio was the thing. And also on radio in those days, because it was the only medium that people had any access to en masse, there were radio shows, dramas on the radio, and they would read scripts and play characters, and the Lone Ranger and Tonto, hi-ho, Silver, and the horses would come running through with the coconuts, right, to make the sound of the horses' hooves, and so the sound effects and all of that stuff was born. In Chicago on WGN radio, which is still a mammoth AM radio station, it's iconic, partly because it is a clear channel station, meaning it carries and reaches all over the place and carries, of course, the baseball games today is why a lot of people would tune into WGN. But anyway, on WGN in those days, there was a radio show called Sky King. And it's hard for us to imagine today, but airplanes were also fairly rare. Air travel was very rare. In the 40s, 50s. And so anything having to do with an airplane would be like having to do with a flying car today or something like that. And so this hero, Sky King himself, would fly in on an airplane, and they would make the airplane noises over the air, of course, to save the day and be the hero of whatever problem or villain there was out there. The voice of Sky King was a wonderful, very radio baritone, booming voice named Earl Nightingale. And Earl had incredible pipes to start with, but he discovered as a young man in radio doing that show, which was very famous in its day, still, even though that was going on, there wasn't much money in radio. Still fairly true. And we make money on radio today mainly by monetizing it, by using it as a lead magnet. It's not a hugely profitable. And if you're a talent on the air with one of these companies even today, you don't make serious money except for a handful of people. So Earl figured out he's moving on from the radio business, and he bought a general agency in the insurance business. Now, general agency in the insurance business in those days would have sold life insurance door to door. And had men in black suits, looking like men in black, and white shirts and ties, and they would walk door to door, knock on the door, and try to convince the average homeowner to buy life insurance. Of course, this was a day and time when it wasn't unusual to have someone knock on your door and not get shot. It'd be weird today to be knocking on people's door. They would be a little bit freaked out, but we had peddlers and other people coming door to door even in those days. And so these men would go out every Monday morning and walk the neighborhoods, walk the suburbs of Chicago, and knock doors. And Earl became a great sales manager, a great motivator, and he would pump them up and give the Rocky speech and give the attack speech and whatever speech, and they would get all jacked up because they faced amazing rejection. I mean, it was like 1,000 no's to get one yes. And they just knock doors until their knuckles are raw, but they make a living. They do well, and they selling life insurance door to door. So Earl's second favorite love, other than running this new general agency very successfully, was he loved to fish. I confirmed this whole story, by the way, with his widow. I never got to speak to Earl personally about it, but I've followed Earl for most of my life in one way or another, and so that's why I've dug up all this history on him in detail. So Earl's widow confirmed that one weekend in the late 1950s that Earl comes into his general manager and says, hey, you got it for 2 weeks. I'm going fishing in Canada. They're in Chicago. He's going to pop across the line and go fishing for a couple weeks. And he loved to do that, especially in the right times of the year, of course. And so the general manager goes, you can't do that. If you leave and you're not here to pump these guys up every Monday morning, the sales are going to go wah, wah all the way down. So for 2 weeks, you're going to see a decline while you're gone. If you leave, you can't leave. And Earl goes, well, I'm going fishing. So I got to come up with something. So he remembered his old radio days, and he went back over to his friend's radio station and went into the booth and recorded a 33-minute talk on an acetone record. Now, in those days, we didn't use tape. We used acetone. It's like a flimsy little record for a temporary recording. It was a flimsy, it resembled like an LP, but very flimsy. If any of you are old enough to even remember, we would put stuff on the back of a bad Archie's record on the back of a cereal box or something like that. It would be like that. It'd be that kind of a thing. Didn't have much shelf life to it, but it wasn't meant to be. It was a temporary recording. So he recorded a 33-minute talk, brought it back, handed it to the general manager, went fishing. General manager played it on Monday morning. The following week, sales went up with Earl being gone. The following week, he played it again. Sales went up again following this. Well, by now in Chicago, Earl is going viral before anybody knew what that meant. Back then, they would have thought it was the flu. And so he's word is out, and the guy that has the clothing store wants all of his salespeople to listen to it. The guy that has the auto dealership wants all of his salespeople to listen to it. Anyone who had a sales team anywhere in Chicago that heard about this increased sales with this magical Monday morning talk on an acetone record wanted a copy of it. They wanted to hear it. They wanted to play it for their guys. Earl gets back from fishing, and his general manager goes, "We got all these requests for this acetone record. I can't hand it out." And he goes, "Well, I'll just," so he goes back to the radio station, presses a master on it, and publishes it in an LP form. Now, LPs are typically, with the music business, they're typically 33s. In something like that, you would do a 78 RPM. If you're old, you remember things like this. I remember this. And so he publishes the talk in an LP and starts to sell it. And this is one of them. I actually collect them. They're antiques. And the reason I collect them is this talk is called The Strangest Secret. You can listen to it on YouTube today. It's laying out there in public domain. And one of these days I'm going to pick it up and do something with it, just because what happened was they started selling these LP records, and this became the first recording of a talk, non-music, in human history to sell 1 million copies. This was the first million seller, this talk, and it is that good. And it launched an entire career in the motivational speaking business, the sales training business. He later teamed up with a guy named Conant, and Nightingale. Conant was born, and in the 70s, they sold more motivational and sales training and management training tapes and training series than anyone in America. They were there long before Covey was in the space, long before Dave Ramsey was anything except broke. And so they were out there moving stuff around in massive volume. The talk is legendary. You ought to listen to it. Those of us that study talks will study something like a Churchill speech or the famous I Have a Dream speech, and look at the cadence of it, the story arc of it, how he's handling his words, because there's a reason that those talks become iconic in terms of the delivery if you're an orator, if you speak for a living. And so those of us in that world, we study people like that and look at that. This is one of those. It's that incredible the way it's laid out. The premise is this. He says in there, Ralph Waldo Emerson says that a man is what he thinks about all day long. Proverbs in the Bible says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And Earl's contention and the strangest secret, that the strangest secret is you become what you think about. You become what you think about. So control your thoughts and be intentional about your aim, because you're going to hit something when you pull the trigger. You become what you think about. He also famously said in another talk, what you can conceive, grasp, and believe that you can do it, what you can conceive and believe, you can achieve. Thus was born the positive thinking movement. And Earl had been a student of Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill probably was the great-grandfather of the motivational speaking movement. Earl was definitely the grandfather of the movement, without a doubt. And a Zig Ziglar would have been born out of that, and a Tony Robbins and a Dave Ramsey out of that. And so that's kind of how that this world that I'm in has evolved in that sense.